Yeah, I believe it's 6 floppy disks.
6 floppy disks.
Maybe it was 8.
Yeah.
But in those days, the number of floppy disks was very, very important to what the money you were making. So, if you wanted to do a big, huge game, like, well, that's just too many disks. So the CD-ROM became this jumping off point for the whole industry where, oh, it's unlimited data.
By the way, I played Arena, so that was, of course, attained legally, as one does.
Alternate means?
By alternate means,
right.
on floppy disks, and that was such an incredible, as you probably have seen, interacted with a large number of people. It's a whole world. It's a world that you escape to in the way, like your favorite book, like Lord of the Rings. It was unlike anything else. It was incredible. It's probably, I mean, of course, as people say, it's the first game you play is the most, is the one that really sentimentally means the most to you. That's, I think, the first role-playing game I played, and it was just changed everything.
It was Arena?
It was Arena, yeah. I think Daggerfall is what I really played, especially because, like you said, the character development was really rich, but just like that you can feel like you travel to this whole other world that's less about entertainment, like a shooting game,
right,
and more about a world. It felt like it's a world, like you're literally there. You can travel there, you can live there, you actually feel like that person, versus like a Pac-Man, like an arcade, fun, entertaining adventure game. So so you joined. You made it. What did you work on first there?
Everyone did a bunch of stuff. So I worked on the basketball game, really just to get it out the door. And Terminator Future Shock. So we were doing Future Shock and Daggerfall at the same time. They were developing a new engine. So it was one of the first 3D engines, the X engine. There were a bunch of guys from Denmark. Actually, there's a big Danish demo scene in those days in the PC, and so a bunch of the top programmers there. Well, look, this is not big. This is not a big company. Maybe there's 20 people in development, and we were doing both Daggerfall and the new Terminator. And so Daggerfall was a bit more, again, behind the Terminator game. So I was one of the main people on the Terminator team, and I don't know, things kind of worked out. I very quickly, I don't know why, like I quickly became the producer, and I was making levels and doing all these things, and it was awesome. And I, like, looking back now, I can understand it better. But at the time, I didn't appreciate it, which is no one quite owned the Terminator license. It was in like this limbo legally. So there was no one to tell us what to, like, no, you can't do that. So we would, pick apart the movies and, how does he mention the gun he wants and the wattage of the laser and all these things. And so Future Shock is a game that I still love today. It does a lot of things that if you go back and look at it, we're frankly still doing. Like, it's a large, open world, post-apocalyptic, landscape height map with instanced objects all over it. And that is still a lot of how we build our worlds.
What's an instanced object?
It's, some games, every, wall or building is kind of unique in its data, whereas we would just build, these little husks of buildings and then place them all over the place. So the memory and the way you render it is much more optimal.
So that allows you to build a bigger world.
It allows you to build a bigger world much faster and not, not every single version of that building is in its own unique architecture that is going to take up memory and processing speed, et cetera, et cetera.
So you're there very much feeling the computational constraints of the system when you're creating these open worlds.
And you know what? That's the thing then. You see some of it now, but in those times, I do feel like every year the technology moved. And maybe it's because the same thing. We're like that my age at that time, where every year somebody was coming up with some new method or some new game system. And it was every year innovation, 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 and then 3D acceleration comes along, and then these things come along, and then HD comes along. And it is true that as time goes on, there is visually a diminishing return in terms of what you're able to do on the screen. And there's a ton of work that goes into it now, because just rendering this cup to the perfect shine and material and roughness, and how does the global illumination off this wall, like, it's a ton of work. But you can pretty much do what you want now if you want to put the time in. Whereas then, okay, you can't do everything you want. So pick your battles really carefully, and technically you couldn't do what you want, if that makes sense.
How much trade-off is there now in how much effort you put into the realism of the graphics versus the story? And actually, not even how much effort you put in, but is there a trade-off in the experience, the feel of the game, in terms of realism and story?
Usually we will start with let the player have as much agency and do as many things as they can as possible. And we will sacrifice some graphic fidelity for that, some speed for that. We could make a game that, traditionally our games are, we okay with 30 frames a second as long as it looks really good and the simulation's running and all of those things. So we'll sacrifice some of that fidelity for the player experience in the kind of things that I do. But from like a manpower standpoint, the graphics programmers work on graphics, the artists work on art, and we have, awesome team of artists and designers, and writers and programmers. It's usually where we find, as time goes on, the amount of art time that it takes to create a cup compared to what it used to be, that has increased. So we do use, like most people use, art outsourcing as well, so that we still relatively, compared to our industry and what we're doing, have smaller teams.
What about the experience of the beauty of the graphics? So like one of the most amazing things about Skyrim, maybe you could say that about some of the other games, but for me, Skyrim is the outdoor. When you step outside, it's the outdoor scenery. So what does it take to create the feeling, especially of that, being outdoors, of nature, and just like lost in the beauty, whatever it is when you go hiking and you feel the awe of it? How do you create that awe? Is that graphics? What is that?
It's a lot of graphics. It's a lot of mood. We just talk about it in terms of tone. And those are, again, going back to my previous comment, the graphics are very, very important to us because, and we always push them, because when you're doing the kind of things we do, where you step into a virtual world, it does have to have that moment of, wow, this feels real. I've never experienced this. And it's okay. I think it's okay to let just like the time settle. Meaning you step out, how does the wind sound? How are the trees moving? How are the clouds moving? I enjoy strolling and watching the sunset. How does it land over the water? Like, it doesn't have to be like, hey, let's go, let's finish a quest, let's go kill things, let's figure out the next step, let's level up. Like, I like the quiet moments a lot. And I think when you play our games, you can tell we spend a lot of time on them. Then you watch like the weather roll in. I think that's just part of being that character, being that person in that space.
Yeah, I saw that there's a mod that removes all enemies. I've been meaning to do that, to just do like a live streamer for hours, walk around Skyrim, and then answer questions and so on. That just feels that's a completely stress-free environment. It's just just like you said, in this moment in time. It's so incredible. It feels as incredible as going hiking or something like that, but in a totally different place, like Iceland or something like that. Mm-hmm. This whole other surreal, ethereal place. It's incredible how you kind of create that. So graphics is a part of that, but also letting it, the temporal aspect of that, like the wind, the rustling sound and look and all of that.
The soundscape is really, really important. And the sky, we spent a lot of time on the sky because it's taking up much more of the screen than a lot of people give credit for.
What about the rendering, the openness of it? Like, how do you,
There's a lot of level of detail, streaming work. You know, nowadays it's getting more common. Like, frankly, the systems are built better for it. Hard drive speed is really prioritized. Like, they're so amazing fast. You take Skyrim and Oblivion and the fallouts of that 360 era. It was a lot of time spent on how do we get all this data streaming in as you move, and then levels of detail so you can see all the way, but not, you know, crush the processor.
You know what? Let's even step back, because you mentioned tone. You mentioned tone a lot. What do you mean by tone?
It's all of it together. If you look at, I think you can flip through, let's just take fantasy. You know, you can sort of look at a couple images or things and know, how does Lord of the Rings different from Game of Thrones, that is different than, you know, a Thurian like Excalibur, or your, you know, Sci-Fi Channel, you know, series of the month kind of thing. And so finding that, what's going to make it kind of unique, and usually I lean on something that is grounded in reality for what it is, and then have lesser kind of fantastical things, at least at the start, and then they kind of build. So even when we do Starfield, I mean, it's a science fiction game. There are laser guns and spaceships that fly around and shoot each other and blah, 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 blah. But it's grounded in, you can look at it and say, oh, okay, this is kind of an extension of things as we view them today in space. And we sort of take the same approach with Fallout, where admittedly things can get even a little bit crazier the longer you're developing Fallout content.
So just to linger on this, so tone starts at, or defining the tone starts at a realistic experience. Like you feel like you walk into this, and this feels like life. Like
what's their technology level, like even for a fantasy world? Like, is magic, how prevalent is it? Or are they making weapons and things and armor? Is it for utility? Is it for decoration? How do they live their lives? Does this feel like a place that you believe that it has some grounding in our reality, whether that's historical or near future, or that it's grounded in some semblance of the reality that you and I understand, so that it can feel, it's also making it feel a little bit welcoming. Like, okay,
is that art or sound? So like, how do you know it's welcoming and everything fits in?
I don't know. I guess it's personal taste. Some people like things that that have more fantastical from the get-go. Even a game like Morrowind, where we get into some more fantastical things, it intentionally starts a little more grounded. You know, there's a very classic medieval-looking town that you come into, but you look just beyond it for mushroom trees and giant insects and things like that.
So in Skyrim, when you put dragon in it, what are your thoughts about dragons?
That's a great question.